Most of us, when we think of Oliver and Company, picture a small, orange kitten, lost and alone in the canyons of New York City. We remember the jaunty soundtrack, the charismatic, street-smart dog, Dodger, and a motley crew of canine pals. It's a classic story from Disney's late 80s Renaissance, a tale about finding your family in the most unexpected of places. It feels simple, heartwarming. But there's a strange resonance to it, a faint echo of something much older and much darker that seems out of place among the catchy songs and cartoon antics. We know, of course, that the film is loosely based on Charles Dickens's novel, Oliver Twist. The names are a giveaway: Oliver, Dodger, Fagin, Sykes. But the moment we place the two stories side by side, the Disney version begins to feel less like an adaptation and more like a deliberate burial. It's as if it's been specifically designed to obscure the story it came from, and that prompts a question. If the 1988 film is the surface layer, a bright coat of paint, what happens when we start to scrape it away? What do we find underneath? And more importantly, what lies beneath that? We are not just going to compare a book to a movie. We are going to treat this story as an archaeological site. We're beginning an excavation, and the familiar, friendly version is just our starting point, the topsoil. Let's grab our tools and gently begin to dig. The first layer we encounter, just beneath the animated surface of 1988 New York, is the smog-choked London of the 1830s. This is the world Charles Dickens creates in Oliver Twist, or The Parish Boy's Progress, first published in serial form between 1837 and 1839. And the transformation is immediate and jarring. Our protagonist, Oliver, is no longer a charming kitten looking for a home. He is a human child, an orphan born into the institutional cruelty of the Victorian workhouse system. The story isn't about the loneliness of being a stray pet. It's about systemic poverty, starvation, and the brutal exploitation of children. Let's look at the evidence directly. In the Disney film, Oliver's primary hardship is being unsold and abandoned on the streets. He's hungry, yes, but his plight is solved by a chance encounter with a cool dog who teaches him how to steal hot dogs. In Dickens's novel, Oliver's defining moment is not a song about street smarts, but the terrifyingly desperate plea, "Please, sir, I want some more." He is not asking for a sausage from a street vendor. He is asking for another spoonful of thin gruel in a workhouse where children are systematically starved. The punishment for his audacity is not a scolding, but solitary confinement, followed by being sold off as an apprentice, first to a chimney sweep and then to an undertaker, where he is beaten and tormented. The gang he falls in with is not a charming troupe of mismatched dogs living a bohemian life on a barge. They are a gang of child pickpockets, groomed and controlled by a man named Fagin. The Dodger, the artful Dodger, is not a carefree Jack Russell Terrier mix voiced by Billy Joel. He is a boy, probably no older than 13, with the cynical world weariness of a man 3 times his age. He is a product of a system that offers him no alternative but crime. The work they do isn't a comical heist for food, it is a grim, daily grind of theft, preying on the public under the constant threat of imprisonment, transportation to a penal colony, or the gallows. And the villains. In the film, the antagonist is Sykes, a shadowy loan shark in a limousine who threatens Fagin over a debt. He is menacing, certainly, but he operates within a recognisable, almost corporate logic of money and repayment. He is a modern, cinematic villain. Dickens's Bill Sykes, with no Y, is something far more primal. He is a housebreaker, a brute whose rage is explosive and unpredictable. He is not just a threat to Fagin's financial security, he is a physical threat to everyone around him, a figure of pure, terrifying violence. The most telling difference, the clearest evidence of sanitization, is the fate of the character Nancy. In the Disney film, Georgette the Poodle fills a vaguely similar role as a female character connected to the gang's world, but she is a comedic foil. The real counterpart is Rita, the Saluki, a compassionate and sensible member of the dog pack. She survives. She gets her happy ending. In Dickens's novel, Nancy is a young woman trapped in a life of crime and in a brutally abusive relationship with Bill Sikes. She performs an act of profound courage, secretly providing information to save Oliver. And for this act of redemption, Sikes bludgeons her to death in one of the most famously brutal scenes in English literature. Her murder is the novel's dark, beating heart. It is the point of no return. Disney didn't just soften this, they erased it completely. So, this is our first excavated layer. In moving from Dickens to Disney, the story sheds its social critique, its historical specificity, and its most profound tragedies. A narrative about the horrors of institutional poverty, and the criminal underworld is transformed into a story about found family. The violence is neutered, the moral ambiguity is clarified, and death is written out of the script. It's a significant change, but our excavation is far from over. Because the question we have to ask now is, where did Dickens get his story? Was he simply observing the London of his time, or was he too working from an older model? Let's dig deeper. Beneath the layer of Victorian social commentary, we find something else. The soil changes. It's less formal, grittier, composed of cheaper, more transient materials. We are now in the world of 18th century London, a city teeming with print shops, taverns, and a burgeoning criminal class. Here, the story of Oliver doesn't exist as a 3-volume novel. It exists as a collection of popular street literature, cheap pamphlets known as chapbooks, and single-sheet printed ballads sold for a penny on street corners. These were the mass media of their day, and as we sift through them, we start to see familiar shapes. One of the most prominent collections, pieced together by folklorists and historians from disparate sources, is a series of ballads collectively referred to as the Fleet Street Lads. Dated by paper and typography to roughly the 1740s and 1750s, they tell stories of a notorious gang of young thieves. The names are different, yet tantalizingly similar. The leader is not called Fagin, but the Factor. The star pupil is not the artful dodger, but clever Jack Skinner. And the villain is not Bill Sikes, but a fearsome enforcer known only as the Cudgel. Let's examine these fragments. Unlike Dickens's novel, these ballads have no interest in the innate goodness of a child protagonist. There is no innocent Oliver at the centre. The focus is on the gang itself, their daring, their methods, their slang, and their eventual, often grisly, downfall. The tone is not one of moral outrage at social conditions. It's a mix of cautionary tale and sensationalist entertainment. It's true crime journalism for its time. A verse from one ballad, Skinner's Hall, gives us a taste. The language is coarse, the rhythm punchy. Jack Skinner tips the knowing glance to spot the gentry's purse, a dip, a lift, a nimble dance, for better or for worse. The Factor waits to weigh the gold, the Cudgel guards the door, a story whispered, bought and sold slash, and always wanting more. There's no plea for gruel here. Wanting more is not the cry of a starving child. It is the motto of insatiable criminal ambition. Here, in this layer, the character of Fagin undergoes a significant change. Dickens's Fagin is a complex theatrical figure, part mentor, part monster, steeped in anti-Semitic caricature. The Factor of the ballads is a much colder, more pragmatic figure. A factor in the 18th century was a commercial agent, a broker, a middleman. This name suggests his role was less about grooming a family of thieves and more about running a business. He is the logistical hub of a criminal enterprise, turning stolen goods into cash. The ballads describe him not in a squalid den, but in a backroom office with scales for weighing silver and ledgers for tracking profits. He is a criminal entrepreneur. And what of Nancy? There is a female figure in these ballads, a character named Moll, a common name for a woman of the streets. But she is no martyr. In one of the grimmest of the ballads, The Cudgel's Wrath, Moll informs on the gang to a magistrate, not to save an innocent, but to save herself from a counterfeiting charge. The cudgel discovers her betrayal and, in the ballad's chillingly blunt language, stops her breath upon the stair. The murder is still there, but the motive is stripped of all nobility. It's a story of brutal gangland justice, not redemptive sacrifice. So, as we stand in this second trench of our excavation, we see a clear pattern of transformation. Dickens took the raw, amoral, sensationalist framework of these crime ballads and infused it with a social conscience. He grafted the story of an innocent child onto the template of a cynical gang. He took the Factor and turned him into the complex, literary Fagin. He took the treacherous Moll and elevated her into the tragic heroine, Nancy. He was not inventing from whole cloth. He was adapting, elevating, and moralizing a pre-existing narrative from the street. But this just pushes our question back another century. Where did these ballad writers get their template? A factor, a cudgel, a gang of clever youths, a betrayal, a murder. The structure is too specific to be a generic invention. It feels like a story that has been told and retold, with the details changing, but the skeleton remaining intact. We are seeing the narrative evolve, but we have not yet reached its origin. The soil beneath our feet is older still. We have to keep digging, back past the dawn of the industrial age, into a time of even greater paranoia and shadow. Now, we must dig carefully. The layers here are fragile, compressed by time and deliberate suppression. We are leaving the 18th century behind and entering the turbulent, politically charged world of late 17th century London. We are in the 1680s. The city is still rebuilding from the Great Fire. The nation is racked by religious and political division, the popish plot, the exclusion crisis, the secret allegiances to the Catholic James, Duke of York, or the Protestant Duke of Monmouth. This is a world of spies, conspirators, and coded messages. And it is here, in this paranoid landscape, that we find what appears to be the bedrock of our story. It's not a ballad or a novel. It's a set of documents discovered by chance in the 1970s by book restorers at the British Library. They were hidden within the binding of a theological tract from 1695. They are a collection of fragmented diary entries and what appears to be a glossary of code words written in a difficult, hurried hand. The paper and ink date them to between 1679 and 1685. Scholars have named this collection the Companion's Cipher. And when we begin to decipher it, the story of Oliver transforms into something unrecognisable and profoundly disturbing. The cipher describes the operations of a clandestine cell of political agents, or companions, working in London. They are not thieves in the traditional sense, they are spies. Their trade is not in wallets and jewels, but in information. They intercept correspondence, steal official seals, copy secret letters, and plant disinformation, and to protect themselves, they use a code. It is in this code that we find the key. The document contains lists of terms, and what we find there stops us cold. The gang members are referred to by animal names. The most experienced field agents, the trackers and surveillance experts, are called the doggers. The term dogger was contemporary slang for someone who doggedly pursues or tracks a person. A new recruit, especially one who is unproven or potentially compromised, is known by a chillingly pragmatic term, a catchpole. A catchpole was a sheriff's officer, a bailiff, someone who arrests people. In the context of the cipher, it refers to an operative whose loyalty is in question, someone who might turn or who might have been caught and turned by the other side. Over time and through the slurring of oral retellings, it is not hard to see how doggers could become simply dogs, and how catchpole could eventually be misheard or simplified into something softer, like a name. Perhaps a name like Oliver. And what about the kitten at the heart of the Disney film? Let's look again at the cipher. The most valuable pieces of intelligence, the documents themselves, are referred to by a variety of code words. Trivial messages are scraps. Important letters are jewels. But what of a message that is designed to be hidden in plain sight, carried by an agent who appears harmless? The glossary provides a term for this, a cat, not a feline. It is likely a shortened form of catalyst or perhaps catalogue, a piece of information intended to trigger a larger event or a list of names and contacts. An operative carrying a cat was therefore a cat bearer. Suddenly, the pieces realign with a sickening click. The original story, the bedrock narrative, is not about a lost boy or a lost kitten. It is about a clandestine political cell, the doggers, who take in a compromised new agent, a catchpole, who is tasked with carrying a vital piece of intelligence, a cat. The entire story is a political thriller of espionage and betrayal, set in the paranoid labyrinth of Restoration London. The other characters snap into this new, terrifying focus. The figure we know as Fagin is referred to in the cipher as the broker. He doesn't teach children to pick pockets. He is an information broker. He fences intelligence, not silverware. He is the spy master who analyzes the stolen documents, assesses their value, and sells them to the highest bidder, be it agents of the Crown or agents of the exiled court. He is a far more dangerous man than Dickens ever imagined, and the enforcer, the man who became the Cudgel and then Bill Sikes, is mentioned in the diary fragments by a single terrifying title, the Verifier. His job is not common thuggery. His job is to verify loyalty and to eliminate security risks. He is the group's internal affairs officer, their executioner. The diary speaks of him questioning a suspected informant. The entry ends with the simple, chilling phrase, "He was verified." The character of Nancy finds her origin here too. The diary mentions a woman, a courier named Anna, who operates between the broker's cell and a group of sympathetic Whig politicians. She is described as being in a relationship with the verifier, a bond of both fear and affection. In one of the last legible entries, the diarist writes that Anna has been caught communicating with a magistrate. She wasn't betraying the group for money or self-preservation in the way the ballads suggest. The context implies she was attempting to negotiate a deal to save the entire cell from a government crackdown, a deal that would have exposed their royalist paymasters. She was trying to save them by sacrificing their mission. The verifier saw this not as a desperate act of loyalty, but as the ultimate betrayal. The final entry reads, Anna verified, all is lost. God save the king over the water. Her murder was not a domestic dispute. It was a political assassination that triggered the collapse of the entire network. So, this is our bedrock. The story that would become Oliver and Company began here as the coded history of a failed espionage ring in the 1680s. A story of doggers and a catchpole, of a broker and a verifier, of a vital message called a cat, and a fatal act of verification. This is the original text, raw, political, lethal. Now we must step back from the dig site and analyse what we've found. Why did this story change so drastically? What forces acted upon it, layer by layer, to transform it from a spy thriller into a children's cartoon? This is the analysis of our findings. We are looking at a process we could call narrative domestication. Each layer of revision served to tame the story, to make it safer and more useful for the era that adopted it. The motives for each change are an archaeology of cultural anxiety. Let's start with the first transformation. From the 17th century Companions cipher to the 18th century Fleet Street Lads ballads. By the 1740s, the specific political struggles of the 1680s, the exclusion crisis, the fear of a Catholic monarchy had faded from immediate public memory. They were history, not current events. A ballad writer looking for a thrilling story would not care about the nuances of Whig versus Tory espionage. What they would find compelling is the raw structure, a secret gang, a tough leader, a brutal enforcer, a betrayal, a murder. The political code, now obsolete, would have been baffling. Doggers, catchpole, the broker. These terms, stripped of their secret meaning, would sound simply like evocative underworld slang. So the story was repurposed. The espionage was rewritten as crime. Stealing letters became stealing wallets. A spy master became a fence for stolen goods. A political assassination became a gangland hit. The story was domesticated from a tale of treason, a matter of state security, into a tale of common crime, a matter of public safety. It was made more generic, more easily consumable for a new audience whose anxieties were about footpads and highwaymen, not secret papists. The essential danger remained, but its context was simplified. Then comes the second and perhaps most significant act of domestication, Dickens's adaptation in the 1830s. Dickens was writing in the shadow of the Industrial Revolution and the deeply controversial New Poor Law of 1834. His society was grappling with unprecedented urban poverty, child labour, and the fear of a growing, seemingly immoral underclass. His anxieties were not about crime as entertainment, but about crime as a symptom of profound social decay. He needed a vehicle to explore these themes. The framework of the 18th century crime ballad was perfect. He takes the gang of thieves but places an innocent, pure-hearted child at its centre. This is his genius. The story is no longer about the thrilling exploits of clever Jack Skinner. It is about the desperate plight of Oliver Twist. The gang is no longer a band of roguish anti-heroes. It is a corrupting force that threatens to destroy a symbol of innate goodness. The amoral factor is reimagined as Fagin, a figure who embodies the societal forces that prey on helpless children. The brutal murder of Moll is transformed into the tragic martyrdom of Nancy, whose death serves to highlight the inescapable brutality of the world she's trapped in, but also the power of her own moral awakening. Dickens domesticates the story by moralising it. He turns a piece of true crime sensationalism into a powerful work of social protest. He keeps the darkness, the violence, the poverty, the fear, but he gives it a clear moral purpose. He is not just telling a story, he is making an argument about the soul of his nation. The original political thriller is now completely buried, invisible beneath two layers of reinterpretation. Finally, we arrive at the third and final domestication, the Disney animation of 1988. The cultural anxieties of late 20th century America were, of course, entirely different again. The primary audience was children, and the primary purpose of the studio was family entertainment. The raw social critique of Dickens, let alone the amoral criminality of the ballads, was utterly unsuitable. The story needed to be tamed one last time, and this was the most comprehensive sanitization of all. The solution was brilliantly simple: remove the humans. By turning the characters into animals, the story is immediately lifted out of any specific, troubling reality. A starving orphan boy is a tragedy that implicates society. A lost kitten is a sad but adorable situation that can be solved with a new owner. A gang of child thieves is a social problem. A pack of street-smart dogs is a fun adventure. The transformation is total. Fagin's menace is defanged. He becomes a hapless, down-on-his-luck human who genuinely cares for his animals. Sykes's terrifying brutality is reduced to that of a standard movie villain. And Nancy's murder, the narrative core of both the ballads and the novel, is simply deleted. It cannot exist in this new context. The most profound irony, of course, lies in the names. The Disney version, in its effort to create a completely safe and new story, paradoxically circled back to the coded language of the 17th century original. It restored the animal nature of the gang, the dogs. And most incredibly, it placed a cat back at the very centre of the plot. Unknowingly, the final act of burying the original story ended up creating a strange funhouse mirror reflection of it. A coded term for a secret message, the cat, became a literal cat. A coded name for a spy cell, the doggers, became literal dogs. The domestication was so complete that it became an act of accidental preservation, preserving the code words while erasing their meaning entirely. What we have uncovered here is more than just the history of one story. It is a map of cultural transmission itself. It reveals how narratives are not static things, but living organisms that adapt, mutate, and are repurposed by the changing needs and fears of the societies that tell them. The journey from The Companion's Cipher to Oliver and Company is a journey through the anxieties of 3 centuries, from the fear of political conspiracy to the fear of crime to the fear of social collapse, and finally, to a world where the greatest anxieties are managed through comforting tales of belonging. This pattern is not isolated. This process of excavation and analysis gives us a new lens to look at countless other stories we think we know. How many tales of heroic rebels began as accounts of brutal warlords? How many children's fables about clever animals started as cautionary tales about human folly or political satire? We see this process happening in real time. We see complex historical figures flattened into inspirational quotes on social media. We see challenging works of art sanded down into marketable, inoffensive products. The forces that turned a 17th century spy into a 20th century kitten are still at work, constantly revising, softening, and burying the more difficult parts of our collective memory. Understanding this process doesn't mean we can no longer enjoy the Disney film. It doesn't invalidate the power of Dickens's novel. Each layer is a valid artifact of its time. Each version tells us a truth, not about the original story, but about the people who told it. The ballads tell us what entertained and frightened the people of Georgian London. The novel tells us what moved and outraged the Victorians. The animated film tells us what comforted and charmed audiences in the 1980s. They are all part of the archaeological record, but the excavation gives us something more. It allows us to see the whole site at once. It restores the parts that were deliberately broken off and hidden away. It reminds us that stories have depth, that they have history, and that the simplest surfaces can conceal the most complex and astonishing structures beneath. The revisions tried to bury the original, to pave over its dangerous meaning with layers of morality and sentimentality, and finally, cartoon paint. But you can't completely erase something. The ghost of it remains. The names, the structure, the faint outline of the original event. It survives. So, our excavation is complete. We started on the bright, sunny streets of animated New York with a story about a cat finding a home. We dug down through the righteous anger of Dickens's London, past the grubby sensationalism of the 18th century ballad mongers, until we hit the cold, hard bedrock of 17th century espionage. We found a story not of a pet, but of a pawn, not of a found family, but of a failed conspiracy. Now, when we encounter this story in any of its forms, we are no longer just standing on the surface. We can see the strata beneath our feet. We can see the singing kitten and the starving boy and the cynical thief and the compromised spy, all existing at once. We are not just consuming a single narrative. We are looking at a cross-section of history, a testament to how we forget and how we remember, and how even the most determined acts of censorship can sometimes, accidentally, preserve the very thing they sought to destroy. The story of Oliver is not one story, it is all of them. And the disturbing truth is not that it's about spies instead of cats. The real truth is that it has been, and continues to be, about whatever we need it to be.